Hi friends, welcome. Today I am reading The Curious Garden by Peter Brown. The Curious Garden. There once was a city without gardens or trees or greenery of any kind. Most people spent their time indoors. As you can imagine, it was a very dreary place. However, there was one boy who loved being outside, even on drizzly days. While everyone stayed inside, you could always find Liam happily splashing through his neighborhood. Look at his little rain boots. It was on one such morning that Liam made several surprising discoveries. He was wandering around the old railway, as he did from time to time, while he stumbled upon a dark stairwell leading up to the tracks. The railway had stopped working ages ago, and since Liam had always wanted to explore the tracks, there was only one thing for the curious boy to do. What do you think he did? Do you think he went off to explore the tracks? He did. Liam ran up the stairs, pushed the door open, and stepped out onto the railway. The first thing he saw was a lonely patch of color. Wildflowers and plants were the last things that he had expected to find up there. But when he took a closer look, it became clear that the plants were dying. They needed a gardener. Do you think he's the gardener? Can he save the plants? Liam may not have been a gardener, but he knew that he could help. So he returned the railway the very next day and got to work. The flowers nearly drowned, and he had a few pruning problems, but the plants patiently waited while Liam found better ways of gardening. As the weeks rolled by, Liam began to feel like a real gardener, and the plants began to feel like a real garden. Look at that, they're coming to life. Most gardens stay in one place, but this was no ordinary garden. With miles of open railway ahead of it, the garden was growing restless. It wanted to explore. The tough little weeds and mosses were the first to move. They popped up farther and farther down the tracks and were closely followed by more delicate plants. Over the next few months, Liam and the Curious Garden explored every corner of the railway. You see that? Look at it, it's all growing everywhere. What a beautiful garden is growing. Have you ever played in a garden like that before? It looks beautiful. After spending his spring and summer and autumn with the garden, Liam's time on the railway was finally interrupted by winter. Heavy blankets of snow fell on the city that season, and for the first time since he'd become a gardener, Liam could not visit his plants. That's just so much snow. It looks like clouds. That is a lot of snow. Rather than waste his winter worrying about the garden, Liam spent it preparing for the spring. After 3 cold months, the snow finally began to melt, and Liam rolled his new gardening gear over to the railway. Do you think the garden is still there? Winter had taken a toll on the garden. It doesn't look so good. But thanks to Liam's planning, his handy new tools, and a little help from the sun, the plants soon awoke from their winter sleep. I think he's even singing with birds. The garden had always wanted to explore the rest of the city, and that spring, it was finally ready to make its move. Once again, the tough little weeds and mosses set out first. They popped up farther and farther from the railway and were closely followed by more delicate plants. It looks even greener than before. The garden was especially curious about old, forgotten things. A few plants popped up where they didn't belong. What is that? Does that look like a stop sign to you? And a fire hydrant? Others mysteriously popped up all at once. But the most surprising thing that popped up were the new gardeners. Look at that, they're everywhere. The whole city has gardeners now. I see some animals, gardens on top of roofs, coming out of windows. Many years later, the entire city had blossomed. But of all the new gardens, Liam's favorite is where it all began, right on the railway. It's a big difference from the city we saw at the beginning of the story, right? It's so green and beautiful. The end. Thank you so much for joining me. Hi, friends. I was so inspired by our story, The Curious Garden, that I wanted to try gardening myself. So I've got some materials here for a seed planting pod. We've got 2 different types of paper, a fork, some wax paper, a bowl here that's got some pre-shredded stuff in it, my little mixture of wildflower seeds, and some water. So our first step in this activity is to take our types of paper and we want to shred it up into little bits and pieces. It won't quite work the same just using scissors because we want these frayed edges to help soak up the water more. So like I said, I have some pre-shredded paper here. So now we're going to add some water to this. Now, if you're just adding water right now like I am, it's best that you let your paper soak overnight. It soaks up more water that way and it's just going to work better. But I'll still continue so I can show you how it's done. So we've got our mixture in here. You can use your fork even if you want to kind of mix it around a little bit. Make sure it gets enough of that water. Again, this is going to look a little bit different because my water was not soaking with my paper all night. So we've also got some seeds and we're going to add some seeds in there. Just sprinkle them just like that. So in this mixture, we can use our fork to mix it up again, make sure those seeds are spread around. The goal is to grab a clump of paper and some of those seeds and pack it into a little pod or a little ball essentially. All right, it looks like it's nice and mixed around in there. So I'm going to take my hands in, I'm going to grab a few pieces. There's some seeds in there. If you want, you can add some more seed, just kind of pack it in as best you possibly can. And so I've got all my pieces and now I'm going to wring out some of that water and just pack this into a nice little round ball, okay? Here we go. So now I've got my first seed planting pod. The reason these pods are cool is because the paper is biodegradable. So when you go to plant it, it'll dissolve and it'll leave the wildflower seeds to eventually take root and plant and turn into some beautiful wildflowers, quite possibly like some of the ones we saw in the story. They also make great gifts. You can let them dry out and the seeds will be perfectly fine. You've got a little, the dried water in the paper and you can give it away as a gift. Why don't you give it a try? And later you can find out if your curious garden grows too. Thanks.